June 15th, 1945. Deep inside a limestone cave near the southern tip of Okinawa. The air is a physical weight, thick with the cloying sweet smell of decay, the damp chill of the earth, and the metallic tang of fear. For 17-year-old Fumiko Tanaka, this has been her world for weeks. Not the world of sun and sugarcane and the turquoise sea, but this subterranean tomb, shared with 50 other women, children, and elderly men from her village. The only sound from the outside is a constant, terrifying rumble. The Americans call it the typhoon of steel. To Fumiko, it is the sound of the world ending. Her universe has shrunk to the flicker of a single whale oil lamp, casting long, dancing shadows on the weeping stone walls. Her stomach is a tight knot of hunger, but it's the thirst that is maddening. Suddenly, the rumbling stops. The silence that follows is more frightening than the noise. It stretches, taut and thin, until it snaps. A new sound, a voice, amplified, metallic, and speaking a clumsy, heavily accented Japanese. Dete kudasai, come out. Anata tachi ni gai wa nai, we will not harm you. The battle is over. A collective gasp ripples through the cave. The old village headman, his face a mask of grim duty, shakes his head. A trick, he hissed. The American Oni, the demons, they will torture us. It is better to die here, for the emperor. Some of the women clutch small, dark objects, grenades, the final, honorable duty. But the will to live is a stubborn root. A mother, her baby whimpering weakly against her chest, begins to sob. The voice outside continues, patient, relentless. Misu ga arimasu. We have water, food, water. The word hangs in the foul air like a prayer. It breaks the spell. One by one, then in a shuffling group, they begin to move toward the sliver of blinding daylight that is the cave's mouth. Fumiko shields her eyes, the raw sunlight of physical blow after weeks in the dark. She stumbles out into a landscape of nightmare. The world she knew is gone, replaced by a churned, brown wasteland of splintered trees and smoking craters. And there they are, the Oni. They are huge, taller than any Japanese man she has ever seen. Their uniforms are a dusty olive green, their helmets strange and round. They carry rifles, long and black and menacing. Their faces are pale, some burned red by the sun, their eyes a startling blue or green. They are exactly as the propaganda posters depicted them, monstrous, alien, terrifying. The women avert their eyes, bowing their heads in submission, expecting the worst. But the blows don't come. Instead, a soldier holds out a metal canteen. The mother with the baby reaches for it, her hand trembling. Then, Fumiko sees him. He is standing slightly apart from the others, holding his rifle at a casual rest. He is as tall as the white demons, built just as powerfully. But he is different. His skin, it is not white, it is not sun-darkened, it is black, a deep, uniform blackness, like polished obsidian or wet charcoal. It absorbs the harsh Okinawan light. She stares, her terror momentarily forgotten, replaced by a profound, paralyzing confusion. She has seen Japanese men, she has seen pictures of white men. In her entire life, in all the stories and woodblock prints and warnings, nothing has prepared her for this. He turns his head, and his eyes meet hers for a fraction of a second. They are just eyes, brown and tired. He offers a small, weary nod. Fumiko quickly looks down at the dirt, her heart hammering against her ribs. The other women have seen him now. A wave of whispered shock passes through the group. Nani, what is that? Good eye. Black. The village headman stares, his mouth slightly agape. They are herded into a line and marched away from the caves, past the hulks of burned-out American Sherman tanks and the shattered bodies of Japanese soldiers. The black soldier walks alongside the column, his presence a silent, bewildering mystery. Fumiko keeps glancing at him from the corner of her eye. She notices the sweat glistening on his forearms, tracing clean paths through the dust that cakes his skin. The color underneath is unchanged. It is absolute. A thought, bizarre yet strangely logical, forms in her mind. It's the only explanation that makes sense in her shattered world. Paint. He must be painted. Sumi. Charcoal ink. For fighting in the dark. A camouflage for the night. But why?
She wonders, her mind racing to reconcile the image before her with the reality she has always known. Why is he still wearing it in the bright, unforgiving light of day?
The camp at Yaka is a sprawling city of tents and barbed wire, carved hastily from the red Okinawan mud. For Fumiko and the thousands of other civilians rounded up from the caves and shattered villages, it is a place of profound disorientation. The routines are alien, the food is strange, canned meat they call spam, crackers in small green boxes, and coffee so bitter it makes them wince. But there is food, and there is water from canvas lister bags, tasting of chlorine but clean and life-giving. The immediate, gnawing fear of death has been replaced by a low, humming dread of the unknown. Their guards are a mix of American soldiers. Most are the pale-faced Oni they expected, but a significant number are from the segregated units, like the 96th Engineer General Service Regiment. They are the black men. To the Japanese prisoners, they remain a source of intense speculation and whispered debate. The paint theory has taken firm hold among the women. It is a comforting logic, a way to place this incomprehensible reality into a familiar box. It must be for night raids, one woman insists, mending a tear in her mompe trousers. They cover themselves in charcoal so our soldiers cannot see them in the dark. It is a clever tactic. Another woman, a former schoolteacher named Mrs. Sato, nods gravely. Yes, the Americans are known for their industrial power. They must have a special, waterproof paint that does not come off with sweat. They watch the soldiers constantly, like amateur anthropologists studying a new species. They observe them driving GMC trucks, their dark arms resting casually on the open window frames. They see them on patrol, the sun glinting off their M1 Garand rifles, but seemingly absorbed by their skin. They listen to the sounds they make, a deep, rumbling laughter that is surprisingly gentle, and a melodic, rhythmic English that sounds completely different from the clipped, sharp tones of the white officers. Corporal James Jimmy Washington of the 96th Engineers is aware of the stares. He's been stared at his whole life, back home in Alabama. But this is different. This isn't the hateful glare of a white shopkeeper or the fearful avoidance on a bus. This is something else, a wide-eyed, almost scientific curiosity. He sees the prisoners pointing, their hands covering their mouths as they whisper furiously. He and his men joke about it. They think we're some kind of boogeymen, Sergeant Davies chuckles, cleaning his rifle. Jimmy just shakes his head. I don't think they have, Sarge. I really don't think they have. The moment comes on the fourth day. A group of women and children are gathered near a water pump. A young girl, no older than 10, has been staring at Jimmy for a solid 5 minutes, her head cocked to one side. Her mother tries to pull her away, whispering sharp, embarrassed warnings. But the girl is possessed by a child's pure, relentless curiosity. She breaks free from her mother's grasp, walks directly up to Jimmy, who is overseeing a work detail, and stops a few feet in front of him. The entire area goes quiet. The other prisoners freeze. The other soldiers stop what they're doing and watch. The girl looks at her own hand, then up at Jimmy's exposed forearm. Slowly, hesitantly, she reaches out. Her mother lets out a horrified gasp. The girl's small, pale finger makes contact with Jimmy's dark skin. She rubs, once, twice. She pulls her finger back and looks at it. It's clean. There is no black residue, no paint, no charcoal. Her eyes widen in astonishment. She looks back at his arm, then at her finger, then up at his face, her expression a perfect portrait of shattered certainty. Jimmy doesn't move. He doesn't flinch. He just looks down at the little girl. A slow, tired smile spreads across his face. He's not angry. He's not even offended. In that moment, he understands. He understands the profound isolation that could lead to such a belief. He gives a small, almost imperceptible shrug, as if to say, "See? It's just me." The little girl runs back to her mother, burying her face in her kimono, chattering excitedly. A shock wave of realization passes through the assembled prisoners. It wasn't paint. It wasn't camouflage. It wasn't a tactic. It was real. This was their skin. This was how they were made. The simple, logical explanation of charcoal has been wiped away, and in its place is a much larger, more bewildering truth. The world they are beginning to understand is infinitely stranger and more complex than they had ever been taught to believe. Their fear of the unknown has just been replaced by the unnerving reality of it. The revelation that the soldier's skin was not painted sent a tremor through the intellectual and emotional foundations of the camp. The whispers did not stop. They changed. The theory of charcoal camouflage was replaced by 1,000 new questions. Where did these men come from? Was everyone in America like this? Were there two kinds of Americans, the white and the black? The women watched the interactions between the segregated units and the white officers, and they began to see the invisible lines. They saw the deference, the separate mess tents, the way white GIs would often look through the black soldiers as if they weren't there. The Japanese, who lived in a society of rigid hierarchy, understood caste systems. They were beginning to see one at play amongst their captors. This dawning awareness began to chip away at the monolithic image of the American demon. The enemy was not one thing, it was many things, and some parts of it were, perhaps, not the enemy at all. The fear that had defined their initial contact with the black soldiers began to curdle into a profound and intense curiosity. The women no longer looked away when a patrol passed. They looked directly at them, their eyes searching, questioning. The soldiers, for their part, responded not with aggression, but with a weary grace. They were used to being observed, to being treated as objects of curiosity or scorn. Here, at least, the curiosity seemed free of malice. The turning point was not a grand event, but a series of small, quiet gestures that accumulated like rainfall, slowly softening the hardened ground of fear and distrust. It happened in the mundane routines of camp life. A child would fall and scrape his knee, and a towering black soldier from a graves registration unit, a man whose job it was to handle the dead, would stop, pull a sterile bandage from his field kit, and gently dress the wound, murmuring soothing, incomprehensible English words. Corporal Washington, seeing Fumiko and an older woman struggling to carry a heavy container of soup from the field kitchen, would wordlessly walk over, take it from them with an easy strength, and carry it to their tent, giving them a simple nod before walking away. One afternoon, Fumiko was sitting outside her tent, trying to sketch the shape of a hibiscus flower in the dirt with a stick, a futile attempt to recall the beauty of the world that was. She was fighting back tears of homesickness and despair. Corporal Washington was on guard duty nearby. He saw her distress. He walked over, not too close, and reached into the large pocket of his fatigue jacket. He pulled out a small rectangular object wrapped in silver foil, a Hershey's chocolate bar, a treasure more valuable than gold in the camp. He squatted down and placed it gently on the ground in front of her, then stood up and backed away, giving her space. He tapped his chest. "Jimmy," he said, his voice soft. He pointed to her. Fumiko stared at the chocolate bar, then up at him. The propaganda had screamed of rape and murder. The officers had warned that the Americans were beasts who would defile them. Yet here was one of them, offering a gift, a simple human gift. She remembered her own brother, a soldier in Manchuria. She remembered the fierce, almost cruel discipline of the Imperial Army. She had seen Japanese officers strike their own men for the smallest infraction. They would never have shown such a gentle concern for a civilian, let alone a prisoner. She hesitantly reached for the chocolate. Her fingers brushed against the foil. She looked up at him, her eyes wide. "Fumiko," she whispered, pointing to herself. A smile touched Jimmy's lips. It was the first real smile she had seen from him, and it transformed his face. The connection was made, not with words, but with a shared piece of chocolate on the red dirt of Okinawa. Later that night, huddled in the tent, she wrote in the small diary she had managed to save. The other women were talking about the black soldiers, their voices no longer filled with fear, but with a kind of wonder. They called them korombo, a simple descriptive term, the black ones, but the tone had shifted from suspicion to something approaching affection. They were kinder than the white soldiers, the women agreed. They were quieter, more patient. They didn't shout as much. Fumiko unwrapped a small piece of the precious chocolate, letting it melt on her tongue, the sweet taste a shocking contrast to the bitterness of her reality. She wrote in her diary, not about a demon or a painted warrior, but about a man named Jimmy. A kind man. The fear, she realized, had been burned away by a small, unexpected act of grace, leaving behind a question that now felt more important than any other. If he wasn't a monster, then what was he? And if the enemy could be kind, what did that say about the war she had been told was so righteous?
As the weeks of summer bled into one another, a strange and fragile society took root within the confines of the Yaka prisoner camp. The rigid lines between captor and captive, between American and Japanese, began to blur in the shared mud and monotony. This was truest in the interactions between the Japanese civilians and the men of the segregated black units. They were two groups of outcasts, stranded together at the bottom of the world's new hierarchy, and in this shared space they found an unspoken and often unseen alliance. The relationship was built on a pigeon of gestures, single words, and shared experiences. The GIs from the 96th Engineers would use their downtime to entertain the children, carving small toys from scrap wood or organizing impromptu games of catch with a ball made of wound-up rags. The children, free from the ingrained prejudices of their parents, were the first to fully embrace them, clambering over them, calling them by their nicknames, Sarge, Smitty, Jimmy. Corporal Washington, who had a younger sister back in Alabama, found himself a favorite, his deep, rumbling laugh a constant source of delight for the small Okinawan kids who would follow him on his rounds. The Japanese women, in turn, began to offer what little they could. They would use their meager sewing kits to mend a torn fatigue jacket for a soldier, a task they performed with meticulous skill. When a soldier fell ill with dengue fever, a group of older women who knew traditional remedies would show his comrades which plants growing near the camp perimeter could be brewed into a tea to help with the fever. It was a barter system based not on currency, but on mutual respect and human need. Fumiko found herself seeking out opportunities to interact with Jimmy. She would practice the few English words she was learning, hello, thank you, water. He, in turn, would try his hand at Japanese, his attempts to pronounce arigato sending the women into fits of gentle laughter. One evening, he sat cleaning his rifle while she watched from a distance. He pulled a worn leather wallet from his pocket and took out a creased black and white photograph. He gestured for her to come closer. She knelt beside him, and he showed her the picture. It was of a smiling young woman and a little girl in a pretty dress, standing on the porch of a small wooden house. "My wife," he said, pointing to the woman, "Sarah." Then he pointed to the child, "My girl, Lily." Fumiko stared at the photograph. A wife, a daughter, in a place called Alabama, a place she couldn't even imagine. It was a revelation. This soldier, this kuranbo, was not just a uniform or a functionary of the occupying force. He was a man with a life, a family, people who loved him and waited for him thousands of miles away. Just like her brother in Manchuria, just like her father, whose fate she still did not know. In that moment, the entire edifice of the war, the idea of a faceless, monolithic enemy, crumbled to dust. She pointed to herself, then made a gesture of writing, and said the Japanese word for brother, Ani. Jimmy nodded slowly, his expression somber. He understood. This fragile peace was not always easy. The reality of the American military's racial structure was a constant, unsettling presence. Fumiko and the other prisoners saw it clearly. They watched as a young white lieutenant with a southern accent would berate Sergeant Davies, a man twice his age and experience, his tone dripping with condescension the Japanese found shocking. They saw how the black soldiers were always assigned the most grueling, back-breaking labor, digging latrines, clearing rubble, burying the dead. They were the victors of the war, yet they were treated by their own white counterparts with a disdain that was sometimes more biting than their treatment of the defeated Japanese. The prisoners realized with a startling clarity that these black soldiers were trapped too. They were not prisoners of war, but they were prisoners of a system, a prejudice as unyielding as the barbed wire that surrounded the camp. This shared sense of being outside forged the final link in their bond. They were the defeated, and these were the disrespected. In a world turned upside down, they had found a strange mutual humanity in the dirt of Okinawa.
In early August, the air itself seemed to change. The rhythm of the camp was broken by a new kind of tension. The guards listened intently to the crackling radios in their command tents. The white officers held tense, close-door meetings. Rumors, carried on the humid breeze, swept through the prisoners. A new kind of bomb, a city that vanished in a flash of light. Another city. Then, on August 15th, it happened. A Japanese-speaking American officer assembled the prisoners in the main square. He held a translated transcript of a radio broadcast. His voice was flat, official. The Emperor had spoken. The war was over. A profound, deathly silence fell over the camp. There was no celebration. For the Japanese, it was a moment of absolute spiritual collapse. Everything they had believed, everything they had fought and died for, had ended in this: surrender, humiliation. Fumiko looked at the faces around her, the old men weeping openly, the women staring into nothingness, their expressions hollowed out by a grief too deep for tears. The world had ended after all, just not in the way she had expected. She saw Corporal Washington standing guard at the edge of the square. His face was unreadable. Was he happy? Relieved? It was impossible to tell. Their eyes met across the crowd, and for a moment, the chasm between their two worlds seemed immense once more. He was the victor. She was the vanquished. The fragile community they had built in the mud seemed destined to dissolve under the harsh light of this new reality. The weeks that followed were a period of orderly chaos. The camp was being dismantled. Lists were made. The long, slow process of repatriation was beginning. The interactions between the soldiers and the prisoners became freighted with the heavy knowledge of imminent departure. The easy familiarity was replaced by a quiet, shared sadness. There were no grand farewells, only a series of small, poignant goodbyes. The children gave the soldiers clumsily folded origami cranes. An old woman pressed a small, hand-carved wooden charm into the palm of the young private from the 96th Engineers, a prayer for his safe journey home. On the day Fumiko and her village group were scheduled to leave, she sought out Jimmy. She found him helping to load supplies onto a GMC truck. She had nothing to give him, nothing of value, but she had practiced a phrase, repeating it over and over until the foreign syllables felt natural on her tongue. She walked up to him, bowed her head deeply, and said clearly and carefully, "Thank you, Jimmy-san. Safe home." He stopped what he was doing and turned to face her. He looked down at this young woman whom he had first seen stumbling, terrified from a dark cave. He had watched her fear turn to confusion, her confusion to curiosity, and her curiosity to a quiet, dignified friendship. He reached into his pocket, but there was no chocolate left to give. Instead, he simply met her bow with a nod. "You too, Fumiko," he said softly. "Take care." And that was it. She turned and walked toward the line of people waiting to board the trucks that would take them away, not looking back. Fumiko was returned to a landscape of ashes. Her home was gone. Her brother would never return from Manchuria. She, like all of Japan, had to learn to live in the ruins. But she carried something with her from the camp at Yaka. It was the memory of a man's unexpected kindness. It was the knowledge that the world was not the simple black and white picture she had been painted, but a place of infinite, confusing, and sometimes beautiful shades. Corporal James Washington sailed home on a crowded troopship, a hero who had helped win the war. He stepped off the gangplank in San Francisco, and a sign above a water fountain reminded him where he belonged: whites only. He returned to Alabama, to the back of the bus, to the same wearying prejudice he had left behind. But he too carried a memory, the memory of a place on a ruined island where his humanity was not questioned, where his skin color was a source of simple wonder, not hatred. He remembered the feel of a small child's trusting hand in his, and the taste of gratitude in a shared piece of chocolate. For a brief, strange moment, in the midst of the world's greatest conflict, two sets of outcasts had found each other. They had discovered that the most profound discovery of war isn't how to fight an enemy, but how to recognize the humanity within one.